In 1929, the University of Southern California unveiled a brand new course called Introduction to Photoplay, which started USC down the path of becoming the first American college to offer bachelor's degrees in cinema, the first round of which was awarded in 1932. In 1940, USC moved the Department of Cinema into its own building, known as the Stables, where the college had previously stored horses for its equestrian teams. In the 1950s, the university became the first in the nation to offer a doctorate in film studies, and then, in the mid-1960s and spurred by the invention of low-cost film equipment like the Super 8 camera, USC became a breeding ground for talent that would help fill the ranks of the American New Wave, most notably George Lucas, whose student film Electronic Labyrinth THX 1138-4EB became one of the most influential sci-fi shorts ever made. After Lucas graduated in 1967, students of the USC Film School began measuring years as AG, meaning after George. At around 2 AG, a young student named John Carpenter worked on at least 11 different short films, including the Oscar-winning The Resurrection of Billy Bronco, before he started a collaboration with fellow student Dan O'Bannon on a science fiction short tentatively titled The Electric Dutchman. Though Carpenter had originally envisioned the piece as a straight science fiction film, the situations the pair came up with together lent themselves more to comedy, and before long, this little sci-fi short would become so ambitious and massive that it would leave USC alongside its lead filmmakers.
Elevator shaft is now activated. All personnel, please clear the area.
Do you have a passion for outer space? Do you want to blow up whole planets to pave the way for future colonization? Do you want to interact with new and interesting alien species? Then you belong on the Dark Star, the vanguard of mankind's expansion to the stars. On the Dark Star, you will use your technical know-how and leadership skills to become a hero of Earth. So join us as we chart a course for adventure and excitement. The future is yours for the taking. The student film version of Dark Star came in at around 40 minutes, but this was too long for the USC student film circuit. Carpenter then decided to extend the movie into feature length and release it as a theatrical film outside of USC's control. But he quickly discovered that by policy, USC owned all rights to every student film created at their school, and the university thus refused to hand over the film's negatives. Exactly what happened next is shrouded in myth, but the most popular telling of events is that Carpenter allegedly stole the negatives in the dead of night with a little light B&E, and that USC subsequently decided to ignore it and look the other way, rather than starting an internal investigation or suing over the rights.
We're all behind you guys.
However they got the negatives, Carpenter and O'Bannon then managed to raise some funds on their own and produce a longer version of the film that was at least a little closer to the 90-minute standard for a feature film in those days. They shopped it around to various studios and distributors until finding Jack H. Harris, the man who had helped produce and distribute such films as The Blob and Equinox. Harris liked the idea of the movie, but during a screening with Carpenter, he thought it was excessively padded out. Harris agreed to produce the film if roughly half an hour was cut, and certain changes were made to get the film to a G rating, which is why the pornography on the walls in this scene is blurred out. Harris gave Carpenter and O'Bannon money to film new sequences to fill out the runtime, as well as to blow up the 16mm film to 35mm, a painstaking process that involved changing the aspect ratio from 4:3 to 1.85:1. Rough estimates claim that the entire budget was around $60,000 in total, most of which was supplied by Harris. Though Carpenter managed to get along with him, O'Bannon couldn't stand the new producer, leading to the long-standing rumor that there is a hidden obscenity directed toward the man on one of the viewing screens. Though Jack H. Harris Enterprises remained on as the film's official production company, Harris, facing messy divorce proceedings, passed the distribution rights over to Bryanston Distributing, the same company responsible for distributing the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Devil's Rain, and the infamous Deep Throat. Not long after releasing Dark Star, Bryanston would face heavy litigation for a variety of reasons, a lot of them having to do with the company's alleged ties to organized crime, and would file for bankruptcy in 1976. Despite it all, though, a more complete version of the film debuted at the Filmex Film Festival in 1974 to a delighted audience that reportedly gave it a standing ovation. It later released in theaters in January of 1975, but we'll get back to that in a few minutes. While we're stopped, I just want to quickly remind you to hit that like button, and if you really do like this video, hit that subscribe as well. Your support really makes this channel possible, so please, if you like what I'm doing and you want to see more, consider joining my Patreon to get access to bonus content, vote on future topics, and more. If you want to see even more from me, I'm also the co-host of a couple of different podcasts, The Streaming Heap and From Here to Paternity, which are available wherever you get your podcasts, and I have a novel called Paradox that is available through Amazon. If all else fails, though, you can always check out my website at emcgill.com, where you'll find written reviews of plenty more sci-fi classics in both film and literature. Now then, with all that shameless self-promotion out of the way, let's move on. Much of the cast and crew for Dark Star was made up of fellow USC students, such as Brian Norell, the actor who plays Doolittle.
What's Calby's first name? My first name.
Unlike O'Bannon and Carpenter, who both left USC before graduating, Norell did finish his degree and would go on to have a moderately successful career as a cartoonist and writer.
Oh yeah, storage area 9 self-destructed last week and destroyed the ship's entire supply of toilet paper.
Dan O'Bannon himself plays the part of Pinback, as well as pseudonymously voicing the two bombs.
Intriguing. I wish I had more time to discuss this matter.
Why don't you have more time?
Because I must detonate in 75 seconds.
Cal Kunaholm plays Boiler in what appears to be his only screen credit, and he missed the film's opening due to a motorcycle accident. The part of Talby was given to Dre Palich, who previously worked with O'Bannon on his short film Bloodbath. Palich's foreign accent was deemed too thick for general audiences, so his lines were dubbed over by John Carpenter.
From what I've heard, Doolittle, they glow. Glow with all the colors of the rainbow. Nobody knows why.
Ironically, though their characters do appear in several scenes together, Palich and Norell didn't meet until the film was fully completed. The computer is voiced by Cookie Knapp, the wife of the film's cinematographer Douglas Knapp, and the alien puppets were operated by none other than Nick Castle, who would not only go on to play the Shape in John Carpenter's Halloween, but would also direct the 80s sci-fi classic The Last Starfighter. Though most of the sets and props were designed by O'Bannon, the Dark Star itself was drawn by his friend Ron Cobb, allegedly on an IHOP napkin. Cobb would have a fairly impressive career of his own after Dark Star, working on films like Alien, Back to the Future, and Total Recall. As for the effects, they were put together by Bill Taylor, who also launched a successful career doing films like Blade Runner, The Running Man, and What Dreams May Come. Most of the sets and props were assembled from whatever junk they could put together, including things like muffin tins, styrofoam packing molds, ice cube trays, action figures, and vacuum tubes. And for the bursts of laser fire and the like, Taylor had to use simple flash paper, given that the budget didn't allow for a powder license that would let him use squibs. One notable prop is this toilet seat, which is named after George Lucas's THX 1138. Effects man Bill Taylor also wrote the lyrics for the movie's main title song, Benson, Arizona, which was inspired by a fateful Christmas car breakdown in the titular rural town. The music for the song was written by John Carpenter, who also wrote the entire score for the film, despite Harris's reservations. It was then up to O'Bannon to edit the entire thing together, which he did several times over the long production process, and again a few years later after release, to take out some of Harris's additions and clean things up a bit. The version that dropped in theaters in 1975, however, was met with negative critical reviews and a box office performance so terrible nobody bothered to make a record of it. It only opened in about 50 theaters, and Carpenter and O'Bannon were dismayed to find virtually empty showings in and around LA. Though the pair had had a good working relationship and had enjoyed their collaboration together, they had a falling out after Dark Star for reasons that are a bit cloudy and depend on who you ask. Regardless of the reasons, Dark Star left a bitter taste in both men's mouths after its disastrous release in 1975. Both persevered, of course, leading to much greater success in the years that followed. O'Bannon would go on to co-write Alien and Total Recall, and would even direct his own successful movie, 1985's The Return of the Living Dead, while Carpenter would become a bona fide master of horror after directing Halloween and The Thing, even though many of his films only gained traction after disappointing theatrical runs. As for Dark Star, it became a genuine cult classic that is fondly remembered today. It served as inspiration for Red Dwarf, Red vs. Blue, and of course Alien, as well as being referenced by Hideo Kojima's Metal Gear series and Danny Boyle's Sunshine. The band Pinback takes its name from O'Bannon's character in the film, and a few lines of dialogue from Dark Star can be found in their songs, as well as in songs by Erasure, The Human League, and Cameral. There was a novelization by Alan Dean Foster, and at least 2 different video games were loosely based on the movie, the Commodore 64's Terminus and the arcade shooter Mad Planets. Dark Star is one of those landmark films that demonstrates a massive shift in science fiction that happened in the mid-70s, where futuristic space adventures no longer had to have virtuous heroic characters and clean shiny sets where everything is made of harsh angles with a chrome-like shine. Dan O'Bannon, who borrowed heavily from Philip K. Dick and Ray Bradbury for certain plot elements, refers to the characters in Dark Star as truckers in space, an idea he would repeat for Alien. And these guys aren't scientists or competent technicians in any way.
Doolittle, I do have a malfunction on this readout, but I can't pinpoint it exactly.
Don't worry about it. We'll find out what it is when it goes bad.
They're basically stoners without the weed. Slackers who have been flung out into space to mindlessly push buttons and be forgotten about. It's telling that when Pinback admits to not being the real Pinback and being just some hapless bystander,
I just want to say that I am not Sergeant Pinback. My real name is Bill Frug, and I am a fuel maintenance technician.
His lack of training makes no difference. In fact, there's a good argument to be made that Pinback is the only member of the crew who is even trying to do a good job. For his part, John Carpenter considered Dark Star more like Waiting for Godot in space, where a handful of characters face existential boredom while carrying out a completely meaningless task. There's something to be said for that, too, in the context of the 1970s counterculture identity crisis. O'Bannon didn't disagree either, citing the paradox of Stanley Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey, where the astronauts undertake the most profound journey, only to find the actual trip to be mind-numbingly boring. Still, as far as I can tell, there's no grand statement being made by Dark Star, no deep thesis to unravel. Satire can certainly have subtext, but this movie is more of a mission statement for Carpenter and O'Bannon than it is a narrative polemic. They set out to prove that they could make something big with very little, that they could entertain without bowing to any kind of Hollywood authority. That was the driving force of the American New Wave, so this movie plants the flag firmly in that camp for both men. And honestly, it's hard not to be impressed by what they were able to do with scarcely more than their own passion and a few muffin tins. Whether or not you find it entertaining is probably a question of personal taste, but I can say I love certain parts of Dark Star, from the memorable beach ball alien fight to Pinback's exasperated video diary, to the climactic moment when Doolittle tries to teach phenomenology to an artificially intelligent bomb. It's a fun ride, and considering the delayed impact it would have on the filmmakers of today, and the way it helped launch a dozen notable careers in the industry, there can be no doubt that Dark Star is a sci-fi classic.
Let there be light.
And that's all for today, my fellow Earthlings. What's your favorite low-budget sci-fi film? Let me know in the comments, and while you're there, don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you for watching, and until next time, when a space shuttle will be shaken not stirred, this is the Unapologetic Geek telling you to never be ashamed of what you love, as long as you're not hurting anybody.
It's just